Moving the microphone slightly.
Blah, 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 blah. Today, we're going to cover Argon 18's grey matter, the baby brother of the dark matter. Argon 18's grey matter is their more price-conscious gravel bike in the range of gravel bikes they make. Argon 18 make 3 different gravel bikes. The dark matter, which is their top-end carbon fibre, beautiful gravel bike. The grey matter, which is an aluminium frame, carbon fibre fork, and a more price-conscious gravel bike. And they also make the Subito e-gravel, which is their electric gravel bike, which has a carbon fibre frame, motor in it, e-bike. When I was speaking to Alex, who is one of the product managers at Argon 18, I was asking him to describe to me the grey matter. The words he used really stood out to me. He basically said to me, the persona of this bike is to go on and get lost. The bike where you kind of, if you're living in a city or in a town, you go, screw this, and you just want to go out and ride your bike. And I thought it was a really lovely way to describe a bike and the persona of that bike as well. Argon 18 see the grey matter customer as someone who is maybe thinking of dipping their toes into gravel. It's potentially their second bike. They've already got a road bike or a triathlon bike, for example, and they're thinking about a second bike to allow them to do something that's a bit different from what they're used to doing. It's an incredibly versatile gravel bike, but as I said, it's quite often considered as a second bike because it's a cheaper offering in the range. What I mean in the sense of this being a cheaper offering in the range is they do builds that start at £1,750 and they do a build with an electronic group set for £2,100. So it really is a very accessible price point bike if you're looking for something to get into gravel. My one that I've got, I've actually raced it at a gravel race as well as using it kind of more as a bit of a commuter bike, and especially in the winter I'm going to mount mud guards on it and use it as a very much like a winter bike with mud guards properly mounted onto the bike so I can still get out when the weather's really bad in the UK 9 months of the year. The 3 words that really stood out to me about this bike when I was sort of researching and understanding a bit more of it was durability, sturdy, and capability. Durability means that the bike is durable. Stability means the bike is stable. And capability means the bike is capable. The bike itself has so many mounting points on it that it's actually kind of mind-blowing how many holes are in the frame. You can mount probably 3 or 4 bottles in the frame in the triangle if you wanted to, as well as on the forks. There's bolts on the down tube, there's loads of bolts in the triangle, there's top tube bolts, there's fork bolts, there's bolts on the rear stays, there's just lots of bolts on it, so you can kind of mount anything and everything wherever you wanted to, really. Same thing with the dark matter. Argon 18 have integrated the cabling into the frame using their 3D Plus system, and you can adjust the height of the headset in the same way as you can with most of their other bikes in the range using the 3D Plus system. There is a 0mm, a 15mm and a 25mm option of extending the headset on this bike, and that means you can reduce the amount of spacers that are needed for the bike and effectively increase the stiffness. So you're never going to lose any stiffness, which you would do by having loads and loads of spacers. It should mean the bike will ride nicer and better and just feel nicer all round, really. One of the reasons that Argon 18 decided to integrate the cabling on the front end of this bike was so that you don't have any issues like using handlebar bags. Most people will probably use this bike with a mechanical group set and not necessarily like an electronic or wireless group set. So you're going to have a few more cables on it, and having all the cabling going into the headset means that you're not going to get any weird bend on the cables which could affect the shifting. So this does also mean that it's very easy to adjust things like a shorter or longer stem and changing your handlebars. So say, for example, if you were to buy the bike as a complete build and the handlebars are too wide, it's quite easy to be able to adjust and change all that kind of stuff because it's not fully integrated. Personally, I actually really like this as a feature in terms of accessibility, needing to pack the bike down, all those kind of things. It works really nicely. What they have done, which I think is very clever, is the cabling is external on the rear stays. So your cabling, if you were running a front mech, would be internal until the down tube where the cabling comes out to connect the front mech if you're using a cable group set. If you're not using a front mech and you just have the rear mech, the cabling is external, basically from about the bottom bracket area going underneath the bottom half of the frame to the hanger where your cable would then go into the mech. This just really helps in the serviceability sense of the bike and helping with that whole versatility and making it easy to use and easy to repair if you needed to as well. The fork on the grey matter and the dark matter is exactly the same fork. The geometry is the same. So if you had both bikes, they're actually very, very similar in terms of how you would set them up based on the geometry. The difference though is the tyre clearance. So the Dark Matter has tyre clearance for 45mm tyres on the front and the rear. The Grey Matter, you could fit a 45mm tyre on the front because it's the same fork as the Dark Matter, but on the rear, Argon 18's recommendation is a maximum of a 40mm tyre. So on mine, I've got it set up with 40mm front and rear Schwalbe G1 Overlands. As I said, the geometry is basically the same, but it does look slightly different if you put them next to each other, and that's purely down to the materials used, one being a carbon fiber frame, one being an aluminium frame. Aluminium frame obviously doesn't have the same ability to mold the tube shapes as you would with carbon fiber. So for example, the top tube is straight on the Grey Matter, while on the Dark Matter it does have a slight kink in it. Geometry wise, in terms of where the rider will sit, is the same between the two bikes. My first ride on this bike was actually using it at Dirty Reaver, which is a gravel race up in Kilda in the UK. The terrain there is generally pretty good gravel, but there are some quite rough and ready bits. And as I was quite soon after coming back from an operation, I actually rode the 65k, but it was a fantastic opportunity to test out the Grey Matter and its capabilities on a mix of surfaces, from road, pretty burly gravel, to I guess like fire service roads, which is lovely gravel. And I was genuinely really impressed. I thought the bike would be good based on having ridden the Dark Matter and knowing how the geometry feels on the bike. But I didn't quite expect it to be as good as it was. I was really pleasantly surprised. And I think you could argue that part of that is not just the frame, it's the choice of componentry and group set that I put on the bike. But I think the frame does so much in terms of the comfort when you're riding, in terms of vibration management and how it handles and corners and steers and everything like that. You can't necessarily counteract that so much with the finishing kit and parts you put on it. Like, a lot of that does come to how the frame's been designed. So all in all, really impressed with it as a bike. It's a very good value gravel bike and could be a fantastic option as a first sort of step into the gravel market. And also I think the paint job's really nice. A bit Christmassy, but really nice. I chose to build up my Grey Matter at a pretty high-end spec, and I did this quite intentionally because I wanted to make it as true a comparison between the Grey Matter and Dark Matter as I possibly could. I will admit the spec of it is pretty bougie. Seat post, stem and handlebar are all from Enve. I'm using the Enve gravel bars, which is a very flared handlebar, slightly different to what I've got on the Dark Matter, but it's a lovely shaped handlebar. It's a bit more flared. It's 42 on the hoods and it flares out to like 54 or something on the drop, so it's got a big flare to it. It's a round bar and it's incredibly comfortable to ride. Same stem on both bikes, which is Enve's road stem. Now this is where it differs as well, is I decided to put a dropper post on the Grey Matter because why not, to be honest. So the wheels on the Grey Matter are slightly different. They're built up with the Enve's G23 wheels, which is their gravel specific rim. It's a shallower rim, slightly wider, and we built them up with a Chris King hub on the rear and a Dynamo hub on the front, so it just gives for some versatility for, you know, bikepacking trips and going exploring, running Dynamo lights basically. Tyres, as I've said, are a bit limited in terms of the clearance being 5mm less than on the Dark Matter, but really a 40mm tyre is still an incredibly large tyre and more than capable for most off-road riding. The group set on the bike is Shimano GRX, their Unstoppable group set, which is GRX 820. Unstoppable is one of the namings of their different group sets that they've done for the 12-speed GRX group set options. The Unstoppable one is a 1x group set with a 40-tooth chainring on the front and a 10 to 51 cassette on the back. So big boy cassette on the back. This is a mountain bike cassette, and you have to make sure that your hub is a micro spline hub to work with the mountain bike cassette. You can get a couple of different options. There's a 10 to 45 cassette or a 10 to 51 cassette, and you can run a 40-tooth chainring or a 42-tooth chainring as well. So with Shimano's 1x gravel group set, the rear mech takes a lot of its technology from the mountain bike side, so it has a clutch feature in it. And if you look at it, it does look very similar to like one of the XTR rear mechs as well. It's obviously, that's where the product has come from really. But being that it's a 1x group set, I actually think that this group set, especially when a Di2 version of it comes out, because it's got to be when, I think that's going to be the one that I want on every off-road bike. The 42 chainring on the front combined with a 10 on the rear means that your hard gear is still pretty big gear, and then having the 51 as your easy gear means you can basically get up pretty much anything with nothing to worry about. And I quite like a 1x group set in the sense of simplicity for off-road stuff. It just seems to work really well. We see it in mountain biking. I think it's going to become more and more of a thing in gravel as the years progress, and when Shimano eventually bring out the 1x Di2 version of this group set as well. So with the 1x group set, of course, all the shifting is done through one shifter. As you know from previous videos, I quite often talk about how I prefer electronic shifting due to some nerve damage in one of my hands. The cheeky bonus is that all the shifting on the 1x group sets is done on the right hand, which is my better hand. So the left hand shifter just has to brake. You can get a left hand shifter which will control a dropper post as well. So there are different options on what you can do with that left hand shifter, but mine is just set up purely as a brake. So what would I like to see to change on this bike, the grey matter? To be honest, not a lot actually. I think it's an incredible bike, especially for the price point of it. The only things I would maybe consider is the introduction of a threaded bottom bracket and maybe beefing up the tyre clearance a bit, but I don't think these are necessarily essential. I think Argon 18 have nailed it with this one. It's a fantastic bike at a fantastic price point, looks really, really good and rides really, really well. So if you're thinking about getting into gravel, maybe this is an option for you. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any more questions about the Argon 18 grey matter, pop them in the comments and I will answer them as best I can. And if I don't know the answers, I will ask someone who does. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. It's definitely cold now. Iced coffee.